I'm going to ask you to indulge me a little bit. It's going to be a bit scientific, and I can't help myself because my background is the sciences. Math is my main love, but I also have an affinity for chemistry and physics, and there was a time in my life where all I studied was physics and chemistry and math. And something that you come to learn when you study physics and chemistry is that while the number of elements in this earth and indeed in the universe are numerous, most of the stuff that we know is actually made out of very simple elements. If you've seen a periodic table, if you've studied chemistry like I have, you know that there are many elements, but in general, most of the things, most of the plants, the animals, the stars, minerals, gases, planets, most of these things are made up of a few simple elements. In fact, the most abundant elements you'll find in the stuff that makes up our universe are carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, maybe some sulfur and phosphorus. Sure, they may be arranged in intricate and very sophisticated molecules, but most of the stuff in our planet, in our solar system, indeed in our galaxy, comprises of these basic elements. And as a matter of fact, these elements are in such abundance in our universe. They're so common. If you look at the human anatomy, you find this to be true as well. If you break down our chemical composition to its very basic elements, you will find that we too are made out of these very simple things: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. And maybe over there's a little bit of sodium and magnesium and calcium, but that's it. That's what generally we're made of. Even though we may seem like we're pretty sophisticated, the stuff that makes us is very simple. The stuff that we're made out of is everywhere in the universe. The stuff that we're made out of, incidentally, is not very expensive. I mean, if you look at the periodic table, there's a whole bunch of really expensive stuff down here. But up there, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, it is so abundant that it is cheap. So because of this, there is a school of thought that would posit that if we're made out of elements that are in abundance in the universe, there's nothing truly special about us. This school of thought would say that the evolving story of the universe that started with a big bang and the ensuing expansion of the universe as stars and planets and life formed spans an arc that is so vast that the collective summation of humanity in the grand scheme of the story of things registers only as a mere blip. If you have the opportunity to sit through philosophy 101 classes, you'll know that this school of thought is called existential nihilism. And if we're honest, there's a kind of nihilism that permeates our society today. It is exposed in seasons like this. You might not think of it, but it is exposed in seasons like this where the real reason and the story of Christmas is shoved to the back. Instead, what we worship at this time is extreme consumerism. At the heart of consumerism is a subtle, permeating thought that there is no intrinsic meaning to life. At the heart of consumerism is a thought that the entire human existence is without purpose. So, eat and drink and be merry, for tomorrow you die and you are forgotten. Think about it. There is no higher purpose to consumerism. It is a here and now thing. It has no regard for the past. It has no ability to forecast for the future. It exists in service of a meaningless life. Whether we like it or not, we have built a society that has a nihilistic view of things. Now, we would never overtly say that. but we've quietly seeded it into the structures and the foundations of our collective lives. And so in our country, in our cities, the millions of people right now walking around, living completely pointless lives, and further reinforcing this thought. Take a step back with me. Let's go back into science again, just for a minute. And think about the elements of the universe again. These abundant elements, these simple elements, these cheap elements. Carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus. While one school of thought would say that there's nothing truly special about us, there's another school of thought, and it's one that I happen to subscribe to, that posits something different. The school of thought that I belong to says that the stuff that forms the universe is the same stuff that forms us. Hang with me. The stuff that powers the stars and the planets in their complexity and wonder is the same stuff that powers us. The stuff that formed the expanding universe, the galaxies, the stars, and seeded life on the planets is the same stuff that powers us. We're literally made out of stardust. So, no, we are not a cosmic mistake. We're much more. What may seem insignificant, invaluable, perhaps even cheap, is actually incredibly valuable because it is precisely the stuff that makes up what makes creation amazing. Now, I use the word creation intentionally. And the reason for this is that I believe in God. And I believe that God created all that is, all that was, and all that ever will be. And no, I'm not talking about a Santa Claus God. You know, that creepy guy who's obsessed with keeping score and watching your every move. You know that song we sing, he sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. Sing with me. He knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. I'm not talking about that creepy guy. That's not God. I'm not even talking about a God who is a genie who grants your every wish. No. I'm talking about the source and the sustainer of all that is created, at once awesome and also intimate, at once dangerous and also powerfully loving, both unknowable and yet also personally knowable, far above the highest human intelligence and yet gracious enough to imprint his creativity on each one of us. A God who is righteous and just, but also gracious and merciful and compassionate and slow to anger. That is the God that I'm talking about. In fact, I've started to think that God's favorite elements must be the ones we talked about, the ones that are most abundant: nitrogen, carbon, hydrogen. I mean, if they were not, why would he have used them so much? I think they're his favorite elements, and perhaps that is the point of this second school of thought, that while it may seem that there is nothing special about us, it turns out that there really is. We're not just insignificant blips in a vast cosmic story. No, rather, we're intentionally and lovingly created out of God's favorite elements. And so God's fingerprints that are in the stars, in the galaxies, on this vast universe, perhaps even multiverse. Don't get me going on that. Perhaps God's fingerprints on that stuff are also in us. You see, if you peel back the layers that we have put over Christmas, if you peel back the Santa Claus and the purchasing of stuff and all those peripheral things to Christmas, you will find a fascinating story. The origin story of the Christmas story is that a boy was born in a manger. You will find in this story a young mother and her husband doing their best to make a stable, a place where they can lie a child and where a mom can recuperate from a birth. You'll find that this boy has actually been spoken of before. Hundreds of years before Jesus was born, a man called Isaiah made a prophecy about Jesus. And he said this, watch for this. A girl who is presently a virgin will get pregnant. She'll bear a son and name him Emmanuel. This word Emmanuel is in so many Christmas songs. What does it mean? It means God with us. Emmanuel, God with us. This little boy, this child is Emmanuel. God with us, God with skin on, God in carbon and oxygen and hydrogen and nitrogen and sulfur and phosphorus form. This awesome, dangerous, and knowable God of the universe is wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger, and made out of the most common elements in the universe. Emmanuel, God with us. Not God's avatar, no, God himself. The full expression of God somehow wrapped in the limitations of human form. The creator and the sustainer of all that there is. The very word that was spoken is a three-dimensional person experiencing growth and pain and hunger and temptation. All that it is to be human, and yet still somehow God. It is the mystery, it is the wonder of Christmas. It is the reason why Christmas exists in the first place, is that it is a celebration of this birth. Yes, people who want to nitpick will say, well, Jesus was not born on December 25th. Yes, December 25th is actually a winter solstice celebration, and the church just repurposed it. But to us who are captivated by Jesus' story, the wonder of his birth is not a small thing. It is not an insignificant thing, and that is the reason why we celebrate it. We celebrate it because it is the moment where the God of the universe takes on human likeness. He looks like you and I. We celebrate because it is God becoming one of us, because his story about us is that we are not insignificant. We can celebrate because his story about us is that we're not merely a blip in the vast cosmic story that started before us. His story about us is that even though we're made out of the most abundant and least valuable elements in the universe, to him, we are invaluable. So invaluable that he would take on our form. He would walk as one of us. He would live as one of us. And when the time came, he would lay down his life to pay a debt that we were too bankrupt to pay. In fact, Jesus, in a conversation with a religious leader of his time, said something about himself that's so cool. He said this is how much God loved the world. He sent his son, his one and only son. And this is why, so that no one need be destroyed. By believing in him, anyone can have a whole and lasting life. God did not go to all the trouble of sending his son merely to point an accusing finger, telling the world how bad it was. He came to help. He came to put the world right again. This is so cool. And so this Christmas Eve, I would like you to start to see yourself with a different perspective. In fact, I invite you to reject the lie that you are insignificant. I'm asking you to challenge the thinking that would say that you are just a bunch of cheap, abundant elements, because you are so much more. You are so much more. And this is the reason why I invite you into a new story of who you are. It is God's story of who you are. It is a story of Christmas in the birth of his son. Because Christmas is not just about the birth of Jesus. It is also about the value that God sees in you. The Christmas story is not just a contradicting story of various gospel accounts. It is also about a story of God's awesome love and the true extent that he will go to reveal it to you. It is a story that says you are cherished, you are valuable, and you are loved. So this Christmas Eve, I invite you to consider Jesus. I invite you to consider Emmanuel, God with us. I invite you into the greatest story of all, the God of the universe, tearing through space and time just for you and me. Emmanuel, God with us. Amen.